All right, so welcome everyone. Today we're going to be going through the webinar, Building Your First Digital File Submission. We're hoping that you're going to learn a lot of great tips from this. We have some great information that we've collected from a local customer here at the City of Burnaby, from Herman, as well as across the world from Dor, one of our partners in Israel. So we'll be your presenters today. My name is Chris, and I'm joined by Sienna. We make up our customer solutions team, and behind the scenes on QA, we have Jovita as well. So please do feel free to chat out any questions at any point in the presentation. We'd love to answer those on air if possible. And if we can't, we will do our best to address those at the end. At this point, I think we're going to turn off our webcams just to save some bandwidth, and we'll see you guys on the other side on QA. All right, and to kick things off, we want to do a little bit of an icebreaker. We want to know, have you already started with your digital file submission project yet? So obviously this is a webinar where you're going to learn a lot of great tips and tricks, some best practices, and even some planning considerations. But we want to know, have you already started on one of your projects for this? Are you at the scoping level, or have you already completed and you're just looking for things you want to implement next? So Elizabeth, I think, are you able to launch that poll?
Yeah, so the poll is now in progress. So there's 4 different options there, as Chris has mentioned, and we'll give everyone a few moments to answer that.
There's also an other. If you are here for another reason, please just let us know.
Awesome, and it looks like most people have voted at this point, so I will close the poll and share the results.
That's awesome. So a lot of people haven't started yet and they're just in the planning stages. So we hope you get to learn a lot of great tips along with different best practices throughout this webinar. And again, please feel free to ask any questions at any point. We'd love to hear what's going through your mind. What could we add some documentation for, or new articles, or even answer at the end of this webinar. So looking forward to it. This is great. There we go. All right, so what we'll be covering today, first and foremost, who we are here at Safe Software, and if you're brand new to FME as well, we'll give a quick overview of the product. Then we're going to be jumping into how you can actually get started with building your first digital file submission project. So we're going to go through some planning considerations rather, along with some tips for how to start building your project and how to implement it so it's ready to go in production. Then we'll look at building that digital file submission project. We'll look at a workspace and a server automation as well as a server app, just to see kind of the whole process and how it could look for your organization. And we'll close off with a bit of a recap and some tips and tricks that we've learned throughout this webinar.
So just a little introduction to Safe Software and FME. We're Safe Software, and the product we produce is FME. So many users seek FME to help them automate the process of reviewing and validating digital files. Through FME, these files can be transformed and output in the best fit-for-purpose application. These transformations can happen automatically and efficiently, making it a great self-serve tool. However, it might be a little overwhelming getting started. So we hope this webinar will give you a good high-level guide into what you might need to think about when building your own digital file submission. It's going to be very high level. We're not really going to get in the depths of workspaces and stuff, but we do have lots of resources linked throughout this webinar. And as well, these webinars are recorded and we'll share the slides and workspaces with you later. So our mission at Safe Software is really to help you maximize the value of your data. This means that the data quality is where it needs to be, and it's in the application where it needs to go.
Right, and who we are Safe Software. So we're a software vendor based out of Surrey, British Columbia, and we've been solving data challenges for a little over 27 years. We're trusted around the world by 13,000 organizations, and we have partners around the world as well. We also have that at the bottom, that stat with the 16,000 community members. If you aren't already a member, please feel free to join the FME community. It's a great place to ask questions, look at different resources, and kind of engage with the rest of the FME world on how to implement new methods into your workspaces, complete new projects, or just learn a simple task like which transformer is best to use. So today we're going to be looking at the entire FME integration platform. We're going to start with FME Desktop on the left, and of course that's where you build and run your data workflows. We're going to use this for a pre-built workspace. We'll just look at the validation workspace that we've prepared, and we'll publish that up to FME Server, which will be an FME Cloud instance in this case. And there we'll be looking at an FME Server workspace app along with an automation to really make this whole process run seamlessly without any human interaction. So again, if you are new to FME and safe software, we started back in 1995 with GIS and CAD data being our bread and butter. And at this point, we've kind of moved down the chain, integrated a bunch of different data formats, and we're up to a count of, I want to say 500 at this point. I'm not sure what the official count is in the 2021 release. But we also have the ability to connect to anything with an API as well. So if any of your formats or systems aren't supported in this list already, but it has an API endpoint that can be accessed through HTTP calls, that's something that can be completed as well. So let's get into our first section of planning. So today, as I mentioned at the very beginning, we're fortunate enough to have been provided a lot of great information and a lot of tips from Herman at the City of Burnaby. So in 2017, Burnaby implemented an automated dial before you dig system. They call it BC1 call. And this is a workflow that's used to extract information from GIS and asset management systems. They use it to integrate it and then produce underground information packages. So in the past, this could take up to 3 days of manual effort, depending on the complexity, but with it being an automated data integration process now, it only takes 3 minutes. So now their staff can use this time and they're more freed up to focus on other tasks and reduce the risk of manual errors that could have been introduced when this was a manual process. At the bottom of the slide, when we do send it out, you'll notice that there's a link to the customer story. So we have a long article that goes through a bit more of the specifics on this. So if you are curious, please do feel free to take a look at that. And again, just want to give a huge shout out to Herman. Thank you so much for sharing your tips for this. I'm hoping this will be beneficial for the entire audience. So alongside with Herman's tips, we've kind of brought our brains together and thought about some technical considerations. And the first and most important thing we've determined is that you need to define and follow a set of standards and procedures to validate against. So this is either going to be you're defining your own standards, or if you're going to be following an existing set, such as MNC, which is a resource that's linked at the bottom here. This will help you to determine what is an acceptable file format. If you need it to be a DWG, a DGN, or living in KML even, you have to define what your source and preferred formats are going to be. Other things that can be considered here for the technical considerations are things like attribute values. Do you need your date formats to be specific? Do you need data types to be a specific data type? How are you going to handle missing values? Do you want them to be nulls or missing? And this is all going to be helpful to make sure that the data being received is of a sufficient quality, because you want it to be compliant with your established business rules. So there's a lot of different considerations that you want to take into consideration before actually setting out and building that workspace. Because with FME, you have the ability to do a lot of validation against all of the full submission rather, so that you can check things like the geometry, if you need dates to be formatted properly, or even down to the geometry level. So there's a lot of great validation tools that you have available to you. And of course, by implementing and following these standards and procedures, you're going to notice a lot of benefits. On the enterprise side, we're going to reduce a lot of errors and costs. We're going to improve the quality of the submissions, and it's going to take a lot less effort. And in Burnaby's case, it saves a lot of time. It only takes about 3 minutes now. For the end user as well, you're going to notice that there's a lot of benefits because they have a user-friendly submission portal where you can have a visual check to see what actually went wrong, what do they need to fix in the submission in order for it to be successful. And of course, back to the time savings that were beneficial for the enterprise, that's of course beneficial for the end user too. You can get a faster approval. So instead of having to wait up to 3 business days, you can be ready in under 3 minutes, or depending on how complex your workflow is, could be a little bit longer or a little bit shorter. And the last benefit on the consumer side of it, or the customer side of this, is you'll be notified for missing information. So for whatever reason, if your validation or if your submission doesn't pass, you'll be notified either by email, SMS, or whatever service you wish to use. You can be notified, and this will give you, again, a faster time to go back and make those changes in order to resubmit and hopefully have that pass. So we have a couple of different resources that were linked in those 2 slides. So again, please feel free to take a look at these. This is the M&C case study is for the parcel map BC. The city of Burnaby also follows a similar set of standards and procedures. So this is an existing resource that is used throughout Western Canada. There may be some for your local region as well. So. And on the enterprise for the consideration side of things, the one main thing that you have to consider here is what departments are involved in your current process. So in the city of Burnaby's example, they were using an automated process for receiving emails. They were integrating it with their GIS and their finance departments. So what departments would you like to integrate with? What's currently being used in your organization? Do you need the files to only be received by your GIS team? And if so, who needs access to the data and what format would it be best? If you need it to go across departments, you can have the file be distributed through to different departments. So you could have things like the GIS department have one set. This could be the CAD file. The GIS team or the engineering team rather could receive the Civil 3D file, and the finance team could receive an Excel file, for example, if they need it. In the city of Burnaby's example, they have the file coming in as a Civil 3D package, and this will be used so it can perform things like attribute validation, and on the finance side, it can be used to audit the constructed infrastructure. So there's a lot of different considerations that you have here. Obviously, with FME's ability to write out different data sets, you have that flexibility to push different data sets to the different departments, and all of this can be handled pretty seamlessly in an automation. And while we're on the automation train, why don't we pass it over to Sienna to talk about some automation considerations.
Yeah, so one thing you have to consider in the planning stages is how you're going to submit the file to FME server. So there are three main ways of doing this. So one is through a self-serve application. This could be a custom built application where you call the FME server REST API in the backend, or this could be an FME server app. And if you've never seen an FME server app, we're going to be showing one off in the webinar today. You can also use automation actions like a directory watch or an email. So as well as considering technical considerations like the size of the file that will be transferred, it's also important to consider the end user as well. Does the user need immediate feedback? Then maybe the self-serve application will be best. Will users need to submit other data with the file? Then maybe a form in that self-serve application might be best again. However, a directory watch might be easier to convince a user to adopt this practice. Just dropping off a file in a directory is much easier than going to another website and opening up an app and filling out a form. Also, email is extremely useful because everyone uses emails, and you can send an email directly to FME server with a file. This will submit the data in the body of the email as well as the file. However, there is a size limitation to the attachments you can send in an email. So these are all important considerations to keep in mind when building your first digital file submission. And you kind of want to keep it in mind as you're building the workflow as to what is going to happen. So for instance, in our self-serve applications, you would use user parameters, and these parameters would consist of your form. However, if you're building a directory watch automation, then there won't be the parameters for the user to fill out. So just keep in mind as you're building your automation. It's also important to consider sending files. So when you're sending a file, you can have a file string back to the user if they're using a self-serve application. So if you write something out to HTML, that can be returned directly to the user as soon as the workspace is done processing. However, with that, you have to consider how long does your workspace take to process. In my experience, QA workspaces tend to be very quick, so it's not that bad. But if you are doing a lot of complex transformation in your workspace, then maybe that isn't the best option for you because the user might be waiting for a while. Another thing you can do is send an email link with the attachment, and the attachment can be hosted on a cloud provider, so it's easy for them to download. This is what Herman said they did with the city of Burnaby because they found that email attachments were too large for them. And on that same note, we need to talk about file storage and request tracking. So another thing you have to consider is, do you want to store files that the user sent you? Herman mentioned for him that there was like liability issues and it's important for them to store files. So they have to consider, how long will these files be stored? Are they going to be on premise or in the cloud? And also, how long are they going to be stored? What's the process like to clean them up? As well, they also like to track the requests coming through. So you can do this on an FME server, but the logs are pretty temporary. So you'll want another tool to track these requests as they come through. And that brings us to the first building stage.
All right, so yes, this is where we're going to be building part one, which is that CAD file submission and validation. So we're going to get started with looking at the FME desktop portion of things here. So this is where we will build the workspace. We're going to look at a couple of different transformers in a pre-built workspace. For those of you who are new to FME desktop, this is a quick preview of what it'll look like, so what you can expect to see in just a short moment here. If you see that screenshot just on the right-hand side, you see there's that yellow object that's going to be a reader, followed by a bunch of blue objects. Those are the tools or the transformers that actually do the work, do the validation on the geometry, test to make sure all the values are met, and create attributes as needed. And of course, this is all done with no coding required. So we're going to be looking at a call before you dig example here. Of course, the goal in this case will be with underground assets. So our goal is to protect underground assets and of course, increase safety on job sites. There could be a couple of obstacles that you can face here, and we'll see at the end, there were a couple of obstacles that Burnaby faced before implementing their FME process, and that would be a steady increase and even surges in incoming requests. How are you going to handle this if this is a manual process? So if you had, say, 900 requests coming in January, and for whatever reason, February was a booming month and you had closer to 1,200 requests, how are you going to be able to allocate your staffing resources to this? In this case, the solution will be to utilize an FME server automation to process these requests. You're not going to need to shift staffing resources from one department to another. This will all just be running 24/7 behind the scenes, and it'll keep churning out the requests as soon as they are finished. So the result of this, and we will see a couple charts here later to consider all the savings you can expect with this. The result will be to reduce the number of staff required to fulfill the requests, and a benefit of that as well is the faster turnaround time. So we'll take a look at one quick example of how this can be handled in FME Workbench, and we'll publish that up to FME Server and take a look at what that automation or that workspace app can look like to kick off that automation. So we'll start off in FME Workbench. Let's wait for that to load up here. And just as I mentioned, we'll do another quick overview for all of those who are new. Just with these yellow orangey objects on the left-hand side, those are your readers or your source data set. We can see there's these green icons. That's just what we call a feature cache. So you can kind of see what your data looks like at any given point in the translation, in the workspace rather. And you can see kind of how the data is going to progress as you go through. So it's very helpful for when you're building the workspace. The blue objects in the middle, those are all the transformers. Again, those are the tools that are going to be doing the work. So in this case, we're going to be doing things like filtering on the layer name. We're going to be exposing attributes. We'll be validating things like the schema with this new schema scanner transformer up here. We'll be using an attribute validator to, you guessed it, validate some attributes. And as well, since we have the ability, let's check for duplicates and geometry as well. So let's actually take a quick look at what's happening in this workspace rather. So we're receiving a CAD file, and this is going to be started with an example file where we're expecting some features to fail. That's why you're seeing features go all different directions. In here, I'll start off with the schema scanner. This is a newer transformer where we have the ability to take a closer look at the file itself. So because we have the ability to QA the entire data set or the entire submission if you're receiving multiple files, you can go down to various levels. So keep in mind that you don't necessarily have to do all of these checks in one workflow. It's all dependent on how strict or lenient you want to be. We just want to provide some visibility to show you what different options you have available to you. So in this workspace, I will be showing things like that schema validation and all the way down to the geometry. So what we're going to be doing with the schema scanner is essentially all the features are going to run through, and our output is going to provide what the schema looks like. So These are the layers that have come out, and it comes out as a list. So if I view this here, we can now see the name of all of the attributes. Give that a second to load up, and we can see all the attributes that are associated with that file. So from here, you could build out any validation. If you want to just ensure that all the layer names match what you're expecting, you could use something like a feature joiner, which I've done at the top here. And if they don't all quite match up, you can decide what happens next. Similarly, you can do the same kind of thing with an attribute validator. So if you want to provide certain requirements for attribute values, you can use this attribute validator. So for example, if you need all of these to have some sort of value, you could do something as simple as it just has a value. Or if it needs to be in a certain range, so say these are a pipe data set and the diameter has to be greater than 0, then you can specify it has to be in a range greater than 0 kind of thing. So there's a lot of different validations you can do here. This can go down to the data type level, as well as there's a couple of different options here. Things like if it has to be a certain length for an ID field, or if it has to be unique as well. There's a lot of different options that you have on the validation side. And just 2 more transformers that we'll highlight in this before hopping into the Workspace app that we've created. The next more common one, I would say, is the geometry validator. So if you have a set of issues to detect against, in this case, we'll just use OGC or issues to detect, you can specify this quickly just using this OGC dropdown. But again, you can go and create your own custom geometry validation process as well. So if you're working with areas and you need the area orientation to be specific, you can just kind of specify it and build the parameters out as you would like. The last transformer that I would like to highlight in here is just going to be this FME Server resource connector. So we're going to be using this to distribute our files to kick off that automation. So I'll just expand this a little bit here. So we'll be putting this into a specific folder. So when this file, assuming it passes all the validation, it's going to go through and put it into one specific folder, which is going to kick off our automation on the FME Server side of things. So all of this kind of works seamlessly together. It starts off with a Workspace app, which we'll hop into next, and it's going to pass that file into a specific folder. Once that file is received there, then the automation starts to kick off and the rest of the process will continue. So we'll take a closer look at that now. The way you would get to that point is first by using this Publish FME Server button at the top here, specifying your connection. So I will already have this connection information filled out, and my workspace is already up here in this case. So we'll publish it, any connections that you need to publish as well, and then you'll get to this registered services area. So in here, you have a couple of different options. I'll just cover the first 3 because they're the most relevant. The first one would be the data download service. So if you wanted to have a self-serve portal using a web app where a customer or a user could upload their file for validation and receive a file in return, that would be the data download service. The data streaming service is what you'll be seeing today, and that's going to be streaming back an HTML page. Could be any other web-based format that's applicable for streaming. And that's going to essentially run the job and display something back to the user. So we're going to use this for a reporting standpoint. And the last one would be the job submitter, which simply just runs the job. And like I said, I already have this on the server, so I will just hop over there right now. Okay, so here we are in the FME Server Workspace app at this point. It is, in this case, it's a very simple bare bones Workspace app where we're only asking for one input. If you needed multiple inputs or what we call published parameters, that could be integrated into this workflow as well. So if you needed your customer to provide things like the address, if you had any IDs that they needed to join on or things like that, you can add additional fields as published parameters, and they can be used in the workspace as well as for submission. So we'll just upload a file. In this case, you can see it's a good data set. This is coming from the city of Austin, and we'll run this for validation just to see how this is going to work. And this is also going to kick off the rest of the automation that Sienna will be showing in just a little bit. So in this case, we see that there was a successful submission. So there was a valid schema submitted. Here are all the attributes from the uploaded file. Here's the layer it's associated with, and all the attribute names are all valid. So it's a very simple one. We can scroll down to see any other summary of features. In this case, there's no invalid attributes, there's no duplicate filters, so the submission was great. If you needed to provide any other IDs linking back to this submission, this could be provided in the output report as well. say you uploaded it to your system and there's a reference ID, you can include that reference ID in this HTML page. So we'll take a quick look at what a failed submission could look like. So for whatever reason, if you had an invalid schema provided or anything else wrong with the file, you could have that same report streamed back to you. And with FME, it'll tell you everything down to that feature level. So in that first bookmark that you saw in the FME workspace, we were validating against the schema. So we were just doing a simple join. We're checking what was expected, which is what we see here on the right-hand side. These are all the expected data types, the associated layers, and what the attribute name should actually be called. And then we can see what the file uploaded contained. So these are the attributes from that file. Was it valid? Yes, but maybe it was on the wrong layer. So it can tell you all that different information. On the invalid attributes and duplicate filter side of things, you can give a quick summary of what's going wrong, and you can scroll down all the way to even a map level. So if you want to see specifics about the features, you can provide the ID for that feature, so the user can zoom in, see what's going on here, and then just in the table below, get a more detailed view of what's causing the failure. So in this case, it fails to self-intersect. In this case, the diameter doesn't have a value, or it's not in the correct range. So there's a lot of great information that you can get provided from these validation transformers, and all of these can be integrated into your workflow. Okay, we will hop back into the demo here, or the slides rather. That's full screen. Okay. So just as a recap of that workspace, there were a couple of key transformers for this validation. And I just wanted to shout out Herman again here at this point, because he did give a couple of other tips for this. So we worked with the attribute validator, the duplicate filter, the geometry validator, as well as the schema scanner rather, to confirm that whole file, that whole submission was complete. Herman's tip for this was to survey your submitters and find out what their technical capabilities of digital file submission is. This could be from the small consultant down to up to the big engineering consulting companies. The reason he mentioned this is because when you're setting too specific of requirements, this could alienate groups and create opposition to change. So you want to make sure this is going to be something that will be accepted by your end users. And from an organizational standpoint, ask yourself, can you create a document to the lowest common denominator to help them train their employees to build their data sets to match this and pass the validation? The other consideration that you have here is, are your submitters willing to participate in prototyping? So you can, as a workspace author on the FME side of things, you can try your best to imagine every single possible error that could potentially happen. Someone will almost always find a way to work around that or find another way to break it. So can you work with these consulting groups, find out what's working best for you guys, and things that you can, different elements that you can catch in those workflows to make sure what you're ingesting into your system is completely validated. So the last thing here is that the key is to find the right balance of details for submissions. So that's something that Herman stressed, and to make sure you're not going too strict on the validation side of things, but you don't want to be too lenient as well. So find that balance, work with your consultants and work with with different departments in your organization, find what works best for you. So I think at this point, we're going to stop for a quick question if any good ones have come in, and we'll pass the controls over to Sienna for the server automation side of things. So let's take a look at that questions panel.
Juvita, did you see any interesting ones fly by that we might want to highlight this morning so far?
Yeah, I see some good ones coming in. The first one was about the schema scanner and whether there was any benefit in using the schema scanner compared to the schema feature out of the feature reader.
That's a really good question. I think they perform very similarly. If you are using that feature reader, it will obviously kick out that schema feature. That's beneficial for dynamic workspaces, I believe, which is more advantage for that. The schema scanner, I think, is if you want to provide anything mid-workflow without having the ability to read in. So it's just a different way of accessing similar information. It's possible there's other benefits as well. I haven't played around with it too much. Sienna, Jovita, I'm not sure if you guys have had a look at it in more detail, but that's something we could also look into and get back to you.
No, I think you're right there. Where the schema scanner is more for mid workflow, but they should produce the same results.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great question. That's a new one to I believe 2021 or 2021.x. So it's a great one. We'd love to hear how you're planning on using it as well, because then we can help to build more resources around the typical workflow for that. So great question.
There's another great question here. So this is for CAD validation. Is it possible to check the coordinate system associated with the DWG and take action based on that?
Yes, that is a great question. So one of the other transformers that could have been included in this is the coordinate system extractor. This is something that can be used to either pull out a coordinate system that is built into the file that was submitted. In the CAD case, it might not have been associated, so you might need to provide a published parameter to accept the user inputs for what coordinate system the drawing was built in. If that is the case, you can also have it reprojected. So if you're asking your users for that coordinate system, then you can do whatever you want with it. So if it fails to have any coordinate system at all, you could fail the whole submission. If it has one coordinate system, let's say lat long 84 for whatever reason, and you need it to be in UTM 83 zone 10, then you can reproject that in the workspace. So it's something that can be dynamically built into your workflow. So that's a really good question.
Mm-hmm. And before we move on, there's lots of great questions here, but another one which is really good is the feature joiner essentially the same as the feature merger? Is there an advantage to using one over the other?
Yeah, they behave pretty similarly. There's a couple of small differences. If you're working with, I would say, what's a good way to put this? Many to all relationship, or all to many, one to many rather, relationship, that's when you want to use the feature merger. If you need a one-to-one match, that's when the feature joiner is preferred. We have a great article that kind of explains the differences between the two transformers. At one point, there was a performance benefit to using the feature joiner, but I think some more effort has gone into that feature merger to catch it up to the performance. So we can grab that link to the knowledge article and share that out for you, because that is those are two transformers that are often commonly used interchangeably. So, so I will get that link and I'll send that out.
Yeah, and there's lots of great questions here. I just want to continue on with the webinar for now, but definitely we'll have lots of time at the end for Q&A. So please continue chatting out your questions. It's always interesting to see what people have to say. Okay, so now we're moving on to the building part 2 portion of the webinar. So after you've done your quality checks and everything is good to go, what happens to the data afterwards? So this is something that FME Server can be used for too. So Chris was mainly showing off FME Desktop, but FME Server is another project we have. FME Server can be used to automate your data. So if you need data automatically transferred to another application, this is where you'd like to go. You can build automations and these applications through the FME Server UI, so all without code. And you can scale it up. So let's say you have lots of people submitting data to you. You need to scale up your FME server quickly. You can do that because there's lots of ways to do that. Just adding more engines to your FME server machine. All of a sudden, you can process a lot more data. So sometimes you might need to get the best of both worlds. Chris already showed off a self-serve application, but you can connect a self-serve application to an automation using a few different tips and tricks that we'll be showing off. So automations allow you to string multiple workspaces and actions together so that the data can be processed automatically. Server apps allow users to upload files, to run a workspace and get immediate feedback, but sometimes you might have a solution that requires both, so what do? Well, you can kick off an automation after a server app. So the FME server app triggers the FME server resource connector to upload a file to the server. And then after this file is uploaded, we have a directory watch trigger that's just watching the file, waiting for it to arrive. So what we had here is nothing happens if the file does not cross or meet Chris's data expectations. However, if they send in good data, then we'll kick off this automation to run. So what happens first is we're going to take this CAD data and automatically push it to ArcGIS Online and Excel. I made 2 different workspaces to do this, but this could be in one workspace. So this is my automation. First, I have this directory watch. It's just going to sit and wait for a file to arrive. Once the user sends in a good file, we're going to automatically send this to ArcGIS Online and send this to Excel at the same time. Since these are 2 separate workspaces, they will run on 2 separate engines, and so they'll be processed in parallel. Once the file has been successfully submitted to ArcGIS Online or an Excel file has been created, we're going to send an email to the departments that need it. So the GIS and accounting departments will get that immediate feedback. So I'm not going to go in the workspace working with the CAD data, but if you do need a really great resource, we have lots of them online on our community. One thing I wanted to point out here was this idea of guaranteed delivery. So sometimes emails could be a little finicky. Let's say your email server is down and it's not responsive to you. What happens then? Do you just lose the email? Well, now we have guaranteed delivery in FME Server. This came out in 2021. And this means we can automatically retry these external actions. So this could be any external action, but in this case, it's email. So we're going to retry on failure, and you can configure this as you need, but basically we're going to keep trying to send that email until it gets through. And then if it continues to fail, you could have another notification for yourself, something to look out for. And then finally, as part of this workflow, we're also going to upload the original files to a cloud storage. So this could kind of be your receipt. So you're keeping the original file as well as any timestamps or information associated with the file. In my workspace, I created a really quick text file that just has date timestamper and the name of the file that it's associated with. However, if the user is sending you lots of information, you could store that in a text file as well. You can also store it in another third-party tool to keep track of your requests. So we have lots of different cloud storage actions that you can use. So we connect to lots of different cloud storage platforms. So with the connector, so if you're building this within the workspace itself, we can connect to S3, Autodesk 360, Box, Dropbox, Google Drive, OneDrive, ProjectWise, and SharePoint. If you see something that's not on that list that you'd like to connect to, please let us know. Typically, these would have APIs as well, so you can always connect to it through an API if you need to. Also, we have external actions, so these would be directly in the automation as well. So we can send files to Dropbox or S3. So let's take a look at what this looks like. So this is my automation. In this automation, I have a trigger. So this trigger will be my directory watch. That's the thing in green. So here we're waiting for a file to arrive in that good directory. We're only going to trigger this if the file is a crate. So if it's a brand new file, we don't care if things get deleted or modified, but that is a setting that you can choose. From there, I'm going to kick off 3 workspaces simultaneously. So one is going to send my data to ArcGIS Online, and it's going to email, well, it's going to email me, but we're pretending it's going to email a GIS group. From there, we also have, at the same time, this file is being transformed into Excel, and it's going to email our accounting department, which is, again, just me, because our accounting department does not like them when I send them emails as part of a demo. And then finally, we're going to upload the original file and a text file to Google Drive. So we should see that this was all kicked off a little while ago when Chris submitted the file. So here we can see exactly that's what happened. So at 8:26 this morning for us, that's when Chris submitted this file. And from there, this automatically kicked off my automation to run. So we have a file to Excel, ArcGIS Online, and of course, Google Drive. So let's take a look. If I open up ArcGIS Online and I look at my data, I can see that this was updated for 8:26. As well as if I look at my Google Drive, I can see I have my data as well as my simple text file there as well. So let's get into a recap here.
All right, yeah, so that was a great example of kind of the whole process from building the workspace, using a pre-existing one, publishing it to FME server for that, that workspace app, and kicking it off in an automation. So we'll kind of hop back to the Burnaby story here, just to talk a little bit more about their benefits that they've noticed over the last 3 years. So FME has been, for this process at least, FME has been in use for 3 full calendar years. It was implemented in April of 2017. And last year, Burnaby actually noticed that their estimated savings was about one and a half staff members annually. So this is kind of averaging about 340 hours that they were able to free up to allocate to different projects. So over those 3 years, they've freed up just the number of hours per year. It was 383, 354, and then 342 last year. And this is, again, reducing the need to take about 1.5 staff members away from other meaningful tasks. So their estimate for when this was a manual process is that it takes about 15 minutes per call. And this was a major improvement, as the original process that dates back to 1994 took closer to a full hour, depending on the complexity of the request. So of course, now that it's been implemented with FME, it's now down to 3 minutes per request. So this is a huge time savings for the city themselves, as well as for their consumers or consultants. It's worth mentioning here again that digital file submission doesn't replace the need for staff. It just enables them to focus on other meaningful tasks. So as another example, you could say in June 2020, they saw an increase of 21 requests compared to May, where if this was a manual process, they might need to pull these members away from other tasks, or if they're on vacation, for example, you might have to pull other staffing resources to help catch up on this work. And to put a dollar amount to these savings, it's saved about $100,000 that they can use to add value to other tasks. So it's a huge dollar savings as well, because you're not allocating these staffing resources to these manual processes. So we'll get into some tips and tricks now. Of course, we've kind of mentioned these throughout. There's going to be a lot of different resources that are linked throughout these slides, so please do take a look at them once the webinar is posted on safe.com/webinars. But I'd say the end take-home message here is don't start from scratch. We have a lot of great templates, a lot of different articles and demos, whether that's on our safe.com/demos page, the FME community, or on the FME Hub. There's a lot of great resources that can help you get started. Of course, what we've showed today is not a one-size-fits-all. Every organization is going to have different requirements, and we typically have resources for all different transformers, whether that's the geometry validator, any of the joining transformers, or anything of the like. We have a lot of great resources, and we're also a bunch of friendly faces, so please feel free to engage with us on the FME community. We love hearing from our customers to find out what they're doing. The other thing is just to reiterate what Herman mentioned, is to find the right balance of details required for submission. So you don't want to go overkill. You don't want to make the strictest standards possible. You want to have some flexibility so there's not going to be a high rate of failure of the submissions. And the last consideration for the tips and tricks is really to consider implementing this in phases. So this could be a big task to take on. We get that. You might have to learn how to use FME in the first place and then implement the process. So why not take a phased approach? Take part 1, for example. You could use just build the workspace for the file validation, get that working on FME server, have it running on an automation so you don't have to have any manual intervention anymore. And then later on, maybe a year down the line or a couple months, look into integrating this with other departments. See who else could benefit from this process or from similar processes, because FME has a lot of great capabilities with a bunch of different data formats. So you can kind of see how this could start to build into more of an enterprise solution if you go with that phased approach to kind of use a retrospective to look back at what's been working, what could be improved. So we'll take a look at some key takeaways now. So again, we'll kind of just reiterate here, take that three-phase approach where you have your planning phase, where you're just gathering the resources and starting small. Start with a small victory, get the wheels turning, get your validation working, make sure all the business considerations have been considered and you have checks and balances in place to take care of them. Then of course, you'll want to build that workspace. So using the resources you've gathered, you can go ahead and try it out with some of the data submitted by your consulting surveyors. You'll want to see what different files will pass and fail, do some Q&A, and you'll actually deploy the project at this point. And again, you'll want to look back at what's been working, what can be improved, and again, who else can benefit. So it's a lot of great times to look back at the process, see if it can be improved from an enterprise deployment process down to just a certain department as well. So there's a lot of great ways that you can take tips from this webinar and get started with these different resources that are available. So. And yeah, pass back to Sienna.
Thank you. So yeah, we just wanted to end off with another quote from Herman. So he said, because of FME, we're able to process tickets 24/7, anytime, anywhere. So it really allowed some of the work to be taken from workers who would have to do this manual process, and now they can work on other things. So the next steps, if you have anything you want to chat about, please reach out to us. So our email is info@safe.com. Have any questions following this webinar, anything that popped up, yeah, send us anything you'd like to know about. As well, we always have free trials. So you can download 2021.2 and download the free trial and test it out. As well, this webinar will contain workspaces. You can try that out as well. And then finally, you can apply anything, any changes you want to those workspaces and try it out with your own data. So we have a few resources. Most of these are just different ways of looking at different stories of people who've done this in the past and what they did. But we also have the bridging between CAD and GIS, and it's just different ways to automate data. Throughout this whole webinar, though, we had lots of links of where to get started if you're looking for resources. As well, you can go and claim your community badge. So if you're not a member of the community, it's something to definitely check out. We've kind of gamified things so you can get different badges for participating in different FME events, and this is one of them. So you can get the community badge as well. Leave that up for one more second just in case anyone needs it.
And I've also dropped the code in the chat there just for anyone's reference.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
No problem.
As well, we have our FME UC coming up. So this is August 24th to 26th of this year. So hopefully we can see everyone there. You can still apply to present. So if you've done something like this and you want to show it off, please apply to present. I'm sure there will be lots of people who find that information really valuable, or you can just register as well. We always have more upcoming webinars online, so safe.com/webinars. This is also where you can find our on-demand webinars. We have lots of webinars working with CAD data if that's something that interests you. And then finally, let's go to our Q&A.
Lots of great questions rolled in as you guys were presenting. First one I've got for you guys is, can you incorporate a virus scan for the files?
So that's not something that's directly built into FME. The only way I could think of doing it is we do have a system caller. So the system caller can call something on your system. So if you had a virus scan installed, you could use some command line to scan the file. I guess something else to mention here is with those server apps, they can be authenticated as well. So if you're worried about this, potentially a user outside your organization sending you a file, you can have the server app be authenticated. So only the users on your FME server can access that server app, and only certain users can too. So that might be another way around it. Chris, can you think of anything else I didn't mention?
Yeah, no, I think that covers it, mainly with that system caller to either kick off the virus scan, or if you have a specific directory that can be just watching, like you can set the virus scanner to watch that specific directory. That could be one way around it. I'm just going to scroll back to our notes in here, because I believe one of the tips from Dor in Israel was actually about this and using their cloud storage. So they weren't able to open up for the customer they were helping. They weren't able to open up their file system for that exact reason. It didn't meet their standards of required cybersecurity. So this is where they leverage that cloud storage service, and I believe Google Drive has a built-in virus scanner for a certain file size. I'm not sure what that size is. So that could be a good workaround, or one consideration as well, is just think about if your cloud service provider does have a virus scan built in to pre-scan that file before it gets ingested into your system. So that might be something worth considering.
Lots of great tips there. Speaking of cloud storage, another asker was asking about connecting to sync.com or some external storage. What would be a good way to go about that?
Yeah,
Oh, sorry, go ahead, Santa.
as far as I'm aware, we don't have any direct connectors to sync.com. However, you can connect to it if it has an API. So we have this transformer called the HTTP caller, which can connect to any API, and that's how you could connect to it. And I think currently that's the only way, unless you know something I don't know, Chris.
No, that would be probably the #1 way. And I just want to kind of loop back to that previous question for virus scanning, because Herman, our guardian angel, is actually attending this webinar, and he just chatted in that for the City of Burnaby's process, they actually use the Microsoft Exchange email for virus scanning. So I guess that's built into their email service. So thank you, Herman.
Yeah, again,
for sharing that tip.
saving us.
The next question is about the coordinate system checker or the coordinate system extractor. Can you flag non-standard coordinate systems? This user tends to get non-EPSG compliant systems.
That is a good question. I would probably say there's definitely a way to do it. It's just depending on how you want to handle it. I'm just adding one to my canvas so I can take a look. Coordinate system extractor would simply add an attribute with whatever coordinate system is being used by that file, or specifically down to that feature level. So you could build this logic into a tester transformer. Say if the coordinate system name in that attribute that's created, if it doesn't contain the 4 letters EPSG, then you can have it go into the failed port, and you can essentially have the workspace handle it however you'd want at that point. So I would say, yes, there is a way to flag non-standard coordinate systems that would be built in with a coordinate system extractor and a tester, and you're essentially just defining the logic on if it's considered standard or if it's not standard. So yeah, or if you're expecting from a specific set of, say, 4 coordinate systems, you could have the tester check to make sure it's one of those 4. If it doesn't, it can fail. So, and that could also be done with an attribute validator as well, using the in operator. So good question.
Beautiful. I am totally agreed on that one. Another CAD question, likely for Chris here. CAD submissions usually contain a lot of layers. Can we run through the validation process only the layers that are more important and ignore those that are not priority, considering priority and non-priority layers are in the same CAD file? So kind of drilling down to only the layers they want. Is that possible?
Yeah, definitely. So with that demo you saw earlier, we were using a feature type filter, and essentially that's just the layers in the CAD file. You can specify, if you know the name, you'd have to know the names of them, obviously, that's part of the validation. you specify which layers you're interested in, and that'll create an output port for each layer in the feature type filter. From there, anything that isn't filtered, those would be your unwanted or the ones you don't really care about for validations purposes. Those ones would go simply to the unfiltered port, and you just don't connect it to anything. So
Excellent.
there you go.
And one last one I've got here, probably for Sienna. If you don't have the budget for FME server or server access, can you use FME desktop to do a directory watch?
Not that I'm aware of. Yeah, I guess what you could do, we have a file paths and directory reader, and then you could use like a datetime tester to, or sorry, like a datetime stamper, then a tester to see if the file is new enough, and then you could schedule that maybe using Windows Task Scheduler, but definitely FME server would be an easier way to go.
Unfortunately, I believe for this user that their IT is locked down their Windows Task Scheduler as well. It's a really good idea with the desktop and the timestamp.
Yeah, oh, that's too bad. Yeah, other than that, I can't think of any other ways. I guess you can run it through command line, but you would still need something to schedule it.
And always worth reaching out to us as well, and we can connect you with an account manager and see what possibilities there are. So wouldn't hurt to reach out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it looks like there were a couple of more tips that came in from Herman and Rob as well. So kind of looping back to that virus scanning question, it looks like other services do this as well. So a dedicated Gmail account can be used for virus and spam scan. And Herman was also mentioning another form of validation could be to check that the data set is actually within your city. So you can use something like a hull accumulator for a submitted feature and cross-check if it actually belongs in your city or municipality. So to make sure it kind of fits in that project area. So a lot of great ways that you can validate this, depending on, again, how complex you want it to be. Just a bunch of great tips available for you. Right.
Awesome. And I think that looks like we've wrapped up all those questions there. Awesome. Okay, so thank you so much to our presenters and to Vita as well for helping us with all that Q&A. I will wrap up by asking, if you do have a few short moments, please share your feedback with us through the webinar survey at the end. It's just 4 multiple choice questions and it helps us continually improve our program. So we really appreciate it. And thanks so much to everyone for joining us. Hope you have a great rest of your days.
Awesome. Thanks so much, everyone.
Yes, thank you.
Thanks all. Bye for now.